Hello YouTube and welcome to Prime Productions. I'm here to help enhance your tabletop gaming experience. If you're new to this channel, I primarily cover Paizo tabletop role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. And of course I have a Patreon and Discord, more info at the end of the video. So a while ago on my YouTube community page, I asked all of you viewers what kind of video you wanted to see me make, and the answers surprised me. You all wanted a lore video about the most influential part of Golarion's history, the rise and fall of Azlant and Earthfall. I say it surprised me because I tend not to do lore videos. I've sprinkled some lore bits in here and there with my other videos, but I don't know if I've done a dedicated lore video before, outside of the Starfinder Primer series, I mean. But I'm happy to give it a shot, so let's do this. Two things before we get started. First off, all of this is for Golarion, the default campaign setting for Pathfinder. Of course, you can make your own homebrew campaign setting if you want, but Golarion is kind of the default setting if you don't want to go through all of that work. The second thing of note is that Paizo lore has been written by a variety of different people for closing in on 20 years. So there's going to be some retcons and contradictions in the lore. I've compiled a fairly accurate timeline, I feel, but if you find contradictory information, that's probably why. We were probably both right at one point in time. So, eons and eons ago, the evil destruction deity Rovagug ravaged across the galaxy. His plan was to destroy everything and everyone, himself last, in an ultimate expression of nihilism. The gods of the time rallied against him, all of the gods, because the good and evil gods alike didn't want to be destroyed. They managed to imprison him in the center of the planet Golarion and forced him into a sort of godly coma. At this point, Golarion had 2 moons, by the way. That will be important for later. Moving forward to something like 20,000 years before the current timeline of Golarion, and there is sentient life now. There were dwarves and orcs who lived underground and didn't even have a conception of sky, and there were elves who had teleported to and then colonized Golarion from the next planet over. And then there were, of course, serpent folk. Now, this is important. Serpent folk are different than lizard folk. It was the serpent folk who had the big empire. And then there were giant, sentient, psychic, Cthulhian nightmare fish. These are the Algulthu. In early Pathfinder works, they were called Aboleth, but there's a naming rights issue, and now they're called Algulthu. I'm just going to call them Algulthu for the rest of the video. And yes, humans were around, but essentially were cavemen, and we'll get to them here in a second. But first, we need to talk about these Algulthu because they are complicated. Technically, they are a galaxy-spanning race of super psychic creatures, but we're just talking about the ones that were stationed on Golarion by, like, Algulthu upper management. They are immensely powerful, psychic, and worshipped or at least worked with Cthulhu. Like, literal actual Cthulhu. Like, H.P. Lovecraft's books are in the public domain, and Paizo uses his mythos, actual Cthulhu. Side note, I know it should be pronounced Kulalu, but everybody I know calls it Cthulhu, so that's what I'm going with. Now, the Algulthu wanted to rule the land and sea, but couldn't spend a huge amount of time out of the water. Their magics could sustain them on land for short bursts, but it was taxing. Either that or they just wanted someone else to do their work for them. Either way, they found the primitive human race and started tinkering. The next part is one of those retcon bits that's a bit unclear. What is clear is that the Algulthu took a bunch of humans and put them on an island, eventually called Azlant, and started messing with them. Story 1 is the Algulthu magically and genetically modified the human race to take over the surface world for them, making them stronger, faster, tougher, and expanding their minds so that they would be better at using magic. In game terms, these humans got a boost to all ability scores, not just 2. Story 2 is that they just took some humans to an island and taught them magic while they themselves were magically disguised. Either way, they spread propaganda and mind control among the humans that they took and kind of set up these humans to be a sort of unwitting slave race. In any event, the humans of Azlant, eventually called the Azlanti, flourished into their own massively prosperous culture. They had a mastery of magic and magic technology that has still not been replicated in modern Pathfinder. Now, this next part is skipping ahead a bit. Eventually, a secret society of Azlanti figured out that they were being mind-controlled and devised a strategy against it. They captured an Algulthu, interrogated them, and also devised a magic item that would prevent mind control. Now, there's a lot of spy stuff and shadow play between the Algulthu and this secret society of Azlanti, but I think the end result was that the Azlanti were looking like they were going to end out on top eventually. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. While all of this is going on, the Azlanti did mix it up in a series of wars with the Serpent Folk. Both societies were super arrogant, but the Azlanti had the magical leg up from the Algulthu and so ended up winning a majority of these fights. This actually ended with a powerful Azlanti destroying the embodiment of an important Serpent Folk god. This devastating blow basically caused the Serpent Folk Empire to collapse. But yeah, like I said, the purple-eyed Azlanti were super arrogant. They thought they were better than all the other races and above the non-uplifted humans. And, I mean, like, they were, but not because of anything they did. They just got the magical cheat codes from the Algulthu. So they were arrogant and racist and were just really terrible. All except for Zin. Now, Zin was no saint, but he was an exceptional Azlanti wizard and a high priest of the goddess Lasala, who at the time was the goddess of rule by virtue. He started studying other types of magic, most of which the Azlanti dismissed as primitive, but he found that they had something to offer. He also started thinking that the Azlanti could teach magic to the non-Azlanti humans. This would help them achieve some of the greatness of the Azlanti Empire. You know, teach them how to do all that crazy, powerful magic technology. His heretical belief of helping out other humans really irked the rest of the Azlanti. Remember, they're super racist, and Zin was kind of exiled from Azlant. He and his followers then moved to the mainland and founded their own country called Thassalon. So Zin sets up this country and starts teaching the humans of the area magic. Now, I need to reiterate, Zin was no saint, but he was just kind of into teaching magic even if you weren't Azlanti. That was his big crime. But he sets up his country and starts teaching humans of the area magic, and they build a society that, well, it wasn't as powerful as Azlant, it was still really good. But Zin, he was a wizard and a priest at heart. All he wanted to do was research magic and pray to his god. He didn't like the whole ruling a country thing. So he sets up the country of Thassalon, but after that he kinda takes on 7 apprentices and teaches them each to master one of the virtues of rule from Lasala. Now, each virtue is tied to a rune as well as arcane and divine magic. It's a bit much to get into here. Long story short, each of his apprentices are essentially archwizards who are good at one type of magic, which is embodied by one of the virtues of rule. Then Zin retreats to his tower to do wizard cleric stuff. Well, almost immediately, these apprentices, now called Rune Lords, decide that, hey, why are they doing all the work when Zin is still the leader? So they get together, mind control a rune giant, pump him full of all the magical buff spells that they can, and just kind of throw him at Zin. And the two blow each other up in a giant explosion of magic, and the country officially belongs to the Rune Lords. Actually, technically, the country belonged to Zin's son, but he was just a pawn. It was the Rune Lords who were really in charge. After that, the Rune Lords almost immediately turn on each other, trying to off each other and take over the country. Their behavior is so reprehensible, and they spread their bad behavior to so many of their followers, that the goddess of rule by virtue becomes corrupted into the goddess of sin. I've said it before and I'll say it again, they straight up toxic relationshiped a goddess into becoming evil. At this point, I should say that some of the Rune Lords were killed and usurped by their successors, some weren't. There's a graphic on screen now that should show you how it all shook out. Now, this catches us up back to the whole Algulthu secret society discovering the mind control thing. Evidently, the Algulthu decided that humanity was too troublesome and dangerous and decided if they couldn't have the surface, no one could. So they devised some sort of super powerful ritual to pull down a meteor from the sky and destroy the entire continent of Azlant. We are talking a wipe out the dinosaurs level meteor. But either they messed up on the calculations or rolled a nat 1 on something, because the meteor was set to wipe out all life on Golarion. Quick side note, at this point the elves realize what's happening and most of them en masse return to their home planet before the meteor can hit. The dwarves have a bit more of a complicated story, and this is another one of those contradiction things. The original story seems to have been that the dwarven god Torag realizes that a meteor that powerful might wake up Rovagug and tells his people to run for the surface. See, Torag is worried that if Rovagug wakes up, the waves of unmitigated evil emanating from his body will corrupt everything in the Darklands, dwarves included. But later sources seem to say that Torag just told the dwarves to run for the surface when the meteor hit and didn't give a reason. Either way, the dwarves begin the quest for Sky, tunneling upwards towards the surface. They first run into the orcs, and initially the dwarves were going to take the orcs with them. But instead, a dwarf cleric fireballs the orc delegation for literally no reason, and the two start fighting each other all the way to the surface. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the Rune Lords all had powerful divination magic and saw the meteor coming. So they found ways to survive, most of them by hopping into a demiplane and putting themselves into magical suspended animation. Now remember, the meteor the Algulthu summoned was going to wipe out all life on Golarion, so the goddess of one of the moons put herself, as the moon, in front of one of the meteors which obliterated the moon, killing her. But it slowed down the meteor enough that it merely caused widespread ecological damage and didn't just destroy everything. This event was called Earthfall. But yeah, Earthfall obliterated the island continent of Azlant, destroying their civilization. The Algulthu picked up some survivors and used magical genetic engineering to turn them into water breathers, creating the Gilman or Azarketi, and took them as a slave race, but that didn't last long. The fallout from the meteor also messed up the Algulthu population. Most of them ended up going into hibernation as well, and in the process basically abandoned the Azarketi. On the dwarf and orc front, they made it to the surface and just kept fighting each other. Some dwarves ignored Torag and stayed below, and they turned into deep dwarves or Hirengar. Side note again, in some versions of the story, Rovagug stirred in his sleep when the meteor hit, sending out those waves of evil which mutated Darkland creatures and turned the dwarves into Hirengar. In other depictions of the story, Rovagug didn't mutate anyone, and the deep dwarves greatly diminished because a bunch of people left, had to devote themselves to the evil dwarven god Droskar in order to survive, and he mutated them into the evil Hirengar. Either way, they exist now. Oh, finally, the meteor did wipe out the rest of the Serpent Folk civilization, at least on the surface. They pulled a reverse of what the dwarves did and went underground, and have a flourishing underground civilization now. It is still evil, though. Remember, they're super arrogant. One final note. So Pathfinder used to have dark elves, or drow. Their story was that instead of going home, they went underground as well, and also got mutated by the waves of evil from Rovagug stirring in his slumber. However, this was written early in Paizo's life as a company, and two things changed. First of all, Paizo moved away from the idea of inherently evil ancestries like orcs or drow. Even the Hirengar are evil now because they made a choice to devote themselves to an evil deity and then presumably taught that stuff to their kids. It was a choice and not an accident of birth. Waves of evil energy didn't just flip their evil switches. That's just a direction Paizo has gone as a company. The second thing was the OGL scandal. I've talked about this on the channel a lot before, but basically, Pathfinder used something called the OGL, which let them use a bunch of Dungeons & Dragons stuff free of charge. Stuff like the Drow. Then in 2022-2023, Dungeons & Dragons tried to renege on the deal, and while D&D ultimately was convinced not to renege, Paizo wanted to distance themselves from anything like that to hedge their bets. And while Dark Elves do exist in the public domain like the Norse mythology Dark Elves, Paizo didn't want to take any chances that an overzealous lawyer might tie them up in litigation. So the Drow were retconned out of existing in Pathfinder. Now, there are Cavern Elves who live underground and have dark vision, and you can say they have purple skin if you like, so you can still play something Dark Elf adjacent, but there's no official group of evil elves living underground in Pathfinder. The role of evil, underground, arrogant civilization is taken up by the Serpent Folk. Man, that was a lot, but that's all I had for today. Let me know if you like these lore explainer videos. I'll certainly do more if you want other bits of info explained. The history of Taldor is fascinating, as is the Cyclops civilizations and the Jitska Imperium. I wanted to thank fellow YouTuber Mythkeeper who helped me fact-check this script and get it out to you. He has a much more in-depth lore channel for Golarion. Go check it out, link in the description below. Hey, as a reminder, I have a Patreon. I'm going to try and post something fun there once a month, but honestly, it's just a way to help this channel keep financially viable. Just a few bucks a month, and I'm toying with the idea of adding a limited higher tier where you can request a specific video. Let me know what you think. I also have a Discord channel, link in the description. Drop by and say hi. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That tells not only me, but also YouTube that you like this kind of content and would like to see more. And until next time, thank you, good luck, and happy gaming!